Welcome back. In this series, I'm going to be making a kilt from double width cloth. So, amongst other things, I've got a fairly interesting pleating style, quite unique, the customer's choice, and we'll also be covering such things as ripping and joining the two pieces together. So, as always, motion sickness alert. Right. So, met with a customer yesterday. Um, this once again, I've been discomfited by my long-standing supplier abruptly going out of business for no good reason. Um, so I had to buy. This was the one source available in order to meet the deadline from Loch Heron. So we've got this Loch Heron double wide. I've measured her yesterday and gone through the options. She decided black strap, chrome buckles. So they go into my piala here, along with the measurements. And I unrolled the cloth out to decide what style of pleating they would like. And the first thing they say is, no yellow. I don't want it pleated to the yellow stripe because it's too military, and frankly, it's a pretty cliche look. So I'm with them there. So, having measured the person, the kilt's 21.5 inches. So I measured in from either side, and then ripped them, put the centerpiece away, and now it's time to join them together. Now, I had shown them just about all of the pleating styles that I could think of. Of course, being me, I thought of another one at 2 o'clock in the morning, but I didn't complicate matters by sending them a text. So the pleating method that they have chosen is to this red line, the first red line to the left of the yellow. And that means that when it's made up, you're going to have the red line centered with green on one side, blue on the other, and it's attractive. And also when they walk or Highland dance or whatever, jump about, they're going to get a flash of yellow inside the pleat, so that's going to look pretty good. So I'd gotten this far because anyhow, so we'd gone through all of the pleating choices, to the set, to the yellow line, to the blue line guarded by red, to the red with blue on the left, to the red with green on the left, and even just to the green. And I got an email first thing this morning explaining what the pleat choice is, and that's great because until I had that information, I couldn't join these two pieces together, because some people will make up the two halves of the kilt. They'll do all the calculations and they'll make up one side of the kilt with the front apron and all of the pleats to the center line, and the other side of the kilt with all of the pleats and then the inside apron. And I don't do it that way. I don't see any advantage to doing that way, because frankly, if you're sewing this together by hand or by sewing machine, it's a little easier when you got the same quantity of cloth, but it just seems a little bit easier just before I get the whole thing going. So yeah, I'm going to see. Let's just mark this temporarily. So that's the pleat. That's the pleat. So the question is, at what point do we sew these two pieces together, right? Because we want it to be buried in the pleat. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mock up the pleat and take a look inside. Let's just do that and that. I'm just going to mark where the crease of the inside of the pleat is going to be. So that's the crease of the pleat. There's the left-hand edge of the pleat. There's the right-hand edge of the pleat. I want the seam to be buried. We don't want it. We must not have it visible from the outside or even the inside of the kilt. We want it buried inside the seam. So to me, it's pretty straightforward that if we put the seam there, right? If we put the seam there, first off, how long? 8-inch. Okay. Now 8 inches is just a 1/16 of an inch short of the red, so I'm just going to bring it down that much farther. And okay, so actually, look, almost made a mistake. Let's bring it to there. So if yeah, see, it's going to be sewn like so, because even though it's out of sight, we want the repetition to carry on as if it was a one piece of cloth. It's not so much our concern about what somebody's going to think when they go through all of the pleats and find the seam, but by keeping this to scale, the pleats will be of the same depth the whole way along. If we just join this together anywhere, one of the pleats would be quite a bit deeper, quite a bit more shallow. So if that's going to be the sewn edge, and this will be the sewn edge, let's give it the width of that red stripe. The width doesn't really matter, but it's 3/8. Normally I rip this, but I don't want to. I'm not very familiar with working with this cloth from this mill. All of my experience, or at least for the last 30 years, has been working with cloth from the Dalgleish mill. And different cloth has different thread counts. The yarns are twisted differently and everything else. So where I would rip that, that's a bad idea, where I would rip that with confidence with the Dalgleish cloth, I don't know enough about this yet because it might pucker, it might pull, so I'm going to cut it. That's a bit of a piss poor cutting line, but it's going to be out of sight. So I tell myself, okay, put that away. Now, let's give ourselves an inch. I could use a straight edge, but I'd have to get up and go find it. The hell did I just do there? Okay. Yeah. Right. There, I'm going to relieve the corner. I'm going to relieve the corner there. my quilting mat underneath. A bunch of pins. Ow. Stick my finger in the pin drawer and about half a dozen just sort of jab into it. That was dignified. Okay, so I could do this on a sewing machine, but I wouldn't be saving any time, right? If you've got a sewing machine and you're absolutely mad to use it and it's all set up and ready to go, I guess it makes sense. But my sewing machine, you know, it's a treadle model. You've seen it. It folds into the case. It would take me, I don't know, more than 10 minutes to set the thing up. I think I'd rather just do this. As you can see, I'm rolling the cloth so that the seam will be at the transition point between the red and the green. Now, that's the bottom of the fell. So I don't need to sew all the way from the top of the kilt. In fact, I don't want to. I shouldn't, because remember later on we're going to be thinning the fell out. And if I do, I'll have cut through the seam, wasted some time and some thread in a seam that winds up on the shop floor, but also I'll have destroyed the integrity of the seam, and eventually, because now it would be a raw end, it would just come apart. So I'm just temporarily pinning that, because what I'm going to do is after I've sewn one side or both sides. It's been a while since I've done this, so I'm kind of reminding myself as I go here. After it's sewn, I'm going to baste with white basting thread up there. Okay. What thread? Oh, lovely dark green thread. Yeah, let's see how that works. It's one of my little rituals. A new cake of wax for every kilt. When I say new, I use a cake of wax until it gets so many cuts in it from the thread that it risks breaking the thread, and I just recycle the things. I melt them down and cast them again. Okay, are you the needle I want? Yes, you're my between. Trying to find a light background so I can see what I'm doing as I tie the knot. Dark thread in a dark background isn't easy. Okay, there we go. So I hope I'm not blocking the view with the back of my head as I start here, but let's go up about not quite an inch, and pinky width, that'll do this. What's happening there? Oh, that's right. Back stitch. Away we go. Okay, well, those pins are probably all gonna wind up getting pulled out. Now, I still maintain this is not a whole lot slower, and maybe even as quick as running it through the sewing machine, given that my sewing machine isn't all set up, because it's a 1902 Singer, and you're supposed to lubricate all the various oil points before you start sewing, and that takes a bit of time because you can't let up the you can't have the machine threaded and ready for use because you have to take the faceplate off. Okay, just for a bit of concurrent activity, I'm going to go grab a couple of things. Might as well plug in my iron so I can iron this. Okay. Okay, iron is plugged in. Got my pressing cloth, my spritz bottle, and my yellow cedar clapper. I'm already noticing this cloth from the different mill. The yarns shed a lot more readily than does Dalglish cloth, which means I just have to be a bit more careful. Okay, so iron's plugged in and heating up. Oh, come on. I have a fella coming by with a kilt he needs altered, and we're getting near time. But I said I'd be here and available for him, so there's a fair to middling chance that we'll hear a thunderous knock on the door, unless it's a timorous, weak knock on the door. But there's a chance, yeah, that he'll knock on the door and I'll have to hit the pause button. slight annoyance. There's a difference in length. It's a cumulative just as I've been sewing this. Tiny difference there, but it's like a 1/16 of an inch in length. But 1, 2, 3. So I've rounded the corner and I'm sewing to a little less than you can see, I'm sewing to a little less than the midpoint. And then I'm going to stop. If I find my knot there. Triple back stitch, right on. Okay, now this is an old library table with varnish. So let's get rid of those. So I'm gonna lay down a piece of cardboard to act as a backstop, or at least a heat sink, heat barrier, whatever you want to call it. Sorry, the iron is sounding warm. Let's give it a spritz. Yeah, that's hot. Okay. Got my pressing cloth. Now let's just roll it as far as I need to, which is like there. Okay. Cloth goes there. Clapper goes on the work, and of course the clapper being red cedar, and it's unvarnished. It's untreated. It draws the heat out, and it also draws as much of the moisture as possible out of the wool, as we can see there. Still a bit warm. Yeah. Okay. I take our cardboard out. And now that's pretty good. I expect I'm gonna have to learn some new lessons with this cloth about how much of a fringe allowance, I guess I could call, after cutting the cloth. This is pretty good stuff. There's a knot right there. Let's make this neat. Okay. There's our seam again. And remember, we went about, make sure I'm sewing to the correct line. Yeah, there's the fell. Let's give it that much. So my quilting pad underneath, so I'm not picking at the table. Now, if I was super patient or had a lot of time on my hands, I might walk away and let this completely dry, but I don't want to. So let's get another piece of thread. Easter is 2 weeks away. This person hopes to have their kilt by Easter. So we're gonna crack on the hours and see. Which, oh yeah, we got lots of time. Of course, when I say that, nature will just throw a chair in front of me and slow me down somehow. Come on. Okay, right on. Do this again on this side. See, the purpose of the clapper, again, it draws the heat and draws as much of the moisture as possible out of the cloth. Its real value is, see, wet wool is a lot more difficult to work, to sew and everything else, and it's also, when it's wet, particularly when it's hot and wet, it's also fairly plastic in the original meaning of the word, in that it can be shaped, it can be stretched, and it can be shrunk. So by removing as much of the moisture and the heat as possible, we just make it a bit easier to work. And these two seams are fairly wide. They're about pinky width apart. Oh, come on. Got a knot in the thread, so this is what's known as a marl. And waxing the thread is supposed to prevent this from happening. So you probably didn't see what I did, but I had sort of an overhand, a loop and a knot in the thread. So I put my needle through the loop and gave it a tug one way to see which way, if it was sort of a left-hand or right-hand knot. So I had the standing part of the thread and tugged, and it didn't move. And then I took the other part of the thread and tugged, and the knot spilled and came apart. And I should do that one of these days with light thread and a dark backdrop or something like that. In any case, so you can actually see what I'm doing rather than watching me mime it and describe it. I'm not tugging this cloth particularly tight because I want it to, I'd rather have a little extra cloth in here which I can shrink. And when I say a little extra, I'm talking a millimeter or so, you know, a very minute amount. Because if I draw it too tight, I'll have a sort of a, no, we'll call it a bubble. You know, the cloth will be sort of bowed on the other side, and ideally we want both of these to lay flat. So by ironing one side and then ironing the other, I have the best chance of getting a nice flat seam. And the other reason for having it about that width apart is it lays flatter than if it was a narrow, if the seams were a little closer together, given my rather generous seam allowance. Because we don't want to see it. We also don't want the customer to feel the seam when they sit down on their kilt, because this will be just about center back, of course. This will be just immediately beside the center pleat. You hear folk walking around upstairs. I think I heard dinner being cooked too. Something I didn't mention, which I should have straight off, when you're setting up to do this, make sure that the texture, the grain of the fabric is the same right and left, because it's really easy to accidentally flip a piece. So you've got one side high right, top left, and the other one high left, top right. And you have to be standing pretty close to the kilt to see it. but it still catches the eye, and it's a boneheaded move, so we want to avoid doing that. Sorry, moving a bit quick because that ain't an antique iron of mine. I'm not sure. It has a rheostat because I heard the rheostat click a minute ago, but I'm still concerned that it'll just keep getting hotter and hotter and hotter, which is the case with my old iron. You bring it up to heat, and you just sort of, again, tap it with a wet finger and listen to the sound of the hiss to tell how hot it was. And then iron, of course, the act of ironing draws heat out of the iron. But you would unplug it at that point so it didn't overheat, because you could burn your cloth if you weren't careful. Okay, there we are. And knotted, ouch, on this side. Okay, and severed. Make sure I remember to get my quilting pad out of here because it'll melt under that heat. Put in my heat barrier and my piece of cardboard. Give it another. Okay, I spilt a bit of water there, which is annoying. I'll probably have to, well, I'll have to mop it up. Okay, unplug that iron before I forget. Put my cloth away, ditto, my backing piece, and let's put my clapper on it. I was a bit clumsy with the water there. Okay. I'm going to let that cool down. I think that's good. Good. So you can see my seam's a little bit wavy. I'm going to baste. In fact, I'll baste that right now. Of course, I've got lots of basting thread here because I tend to recycle it. Okay, where's my quilting pad, just so I don't gnaw away at the table. Okay, so that's about lined up. Let's baste it so it stays in that position. Yeah. Here we are. And that can just stay there right till the kilt's finished, because it's going to be out of sight. Now, so this is going to be the middle pleat. And this will be the first one past middle. Wrong. That's the first one past middle. I'll get back here. Ow! That iron was a bit hot, surprisingly. Okay, there's our middle pleat. There's our next pleat. We put that like so. And as you can see, the seam is nicely hidden. Feels laying rather flat, right on. So it's nicely hidden in the pleat. It's not going to be visible even if the person's moving fast. You'd have to open up the pleat to find that crease, and not visible from the inside. So there you go, there's a win. I'm going to stop here and put my iron and everything else away. I'm going to lay out this cloth because it's just about quitting time anyway. I'm going to lay out this cloth and let it dry out for a couple of hours. So thanks for joining me. When I get back to it, we'll be continuing on working with this Macintosh hunting kilt. Oh, I forgot to mention motion sickness. Too bad.